So, all right, thanks everybody. So hello, my name is Rebecca Starkey. I'm a member of the University Library Section Current Topics Discussion Group, and I am pleased to be moderating our discussion today, Library Programming for a Summer Institute for New Graduate Students from Underrepresented Groups. Our discussion is being led today by two librarians from the University of Minnesota, Kate Peterson, the Undergraduate Services Librarian, and Brian Vetruba, the European Studies and Digital Scholarship Librarian. Before we start, just some brief housekeeping. We ask that you remain muted through the presentation. You may feel free to enter comments or questions during the presentation portion of the program through the chat window. We'll return to those during the discussion. If you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand feature and we'll answer everyone in order. And finally, we know this is a really very challenging day, and I know many of us are heartbroken and fearful, and there's a lot of feelings to manage. And not everybody may feel comfortable participating as they normally would. So we understand, and I'm sure our speakers welcome follow-up questions or comments at a later time. So above all, please care for each other and yourself as needed. So with that, I'm going to pass that on to Brian and Kate, and feel free to begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate your words right before we get started here. So why don't we do brief introductions and then I'll officially share my screen. Even, I guess, a reintroduction. So again, my name is Kate Peterson and my title is Undergraduate Services Librarian, but I'm also a liaison. We have a liaison model here to the Department of Writing Studies. And then I just have lots of different things that I do. So a lot of things with first year students, but also orientation. So that sometimes takes the form of orientating graduate students. And that's sort of how I got connected to this a long time ago. So I'm going to turn over to Brian for his introduction, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, everyone. Brian Vetruba, I use he, him, his pronoun. And I am the librarian for European Studies, Jewish Studies, and Linguistics here at the University of Minnesota. And I'm also the library's liaison to the graduate school. So that kind of explains why I'm involved with the Summer Institute for Graduate Students. And I also am affiliated and a colleague of Rebecca's at the University of Chicago. So the University of Minnesota and the University of Chicago have a librarian exchange. And so I also serve as the subject librarian for Germanic literature and Scandinavian studies at U Chicago. And then one of their librarians covers Francophone studies and Italian studies for Minnesota. So welcome.
All right, thank you, Brian. So we are excited that the chat is going to be available to us. So we are excited to share more about our program. And on this slide here, you can see that there is a link to our slides. So if you go to z.umn.edu/ACRL, MINN, abbreviation for Minnesota, and slides, you can get back to these now or at any time. And then we also look forward to hearing more from you all about what are some things that you're doing in your work with undergraduate students or with students from underrepresented groups, or just anything else that you're interested in sharing. And I think, Brian, at some point we can share a link to the slides in the chat as well, if you would like to follow along with us. So for the agenda today, we're going to give a little bit of background about how we have been connected with the Summer Institute, and then, of course, the pandemic and how that changed what we were doing. We'll dive a little bit deeper into summer 2021 because we were able to try a couple of new things. We'll share some evaluation and feedback from students and librarians who are part of this. And then we'll also talk briefly about summer 2022 planning. We are happy to get questions through the chat or other features at other times, but then we'll also have sort of breaks where we're going to ask you all again for some feedback. And what we really want to do is just sort of share this what I might consider kind of a small scale program, but really just have a practical conversation about what you all have been up to, what you think about this program, how you've been working with graduate students, what questions you have, how you're thinking about going into summer 2022 when we're in this new, interesting, weird phase of whatever the pandemic is. That is, we're trying to figure out now, what does this summer look like, and things like that. So we're just really excited that you are here. All right, so briefly, if you're not familiar with the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, we are an R1 institution located in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Our campus is on 2 different cities with the Mississippi River in between. To give you an idea of our size, we are a very large institution. So we have 30,000 approximately undergraduate students, about 12,000 graduate students, and about 4,000 professional students. We have 12 libraries on campus. And then I think I mentioned earlier that we have a liaison librarian model. So we have a librarian for every department on campus, which means we have a lot of library and library staff. And we have a really, again, kind of just big campus where it can sometimes be challenging to serve programs that are really big and kind of campus wide. So we also want to acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built under the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. And we want to raise up this acknowledgement created by Darlene Sinclair and a campus office we have called the Circle of Indigenous Nations. And we really just want to, again, acknowledge this fact and kind of renew our commitment to educating ourselves and our campus and our community to the ongoing relationship that Dakota people have to this area. So now we want to get to know you all briefly. So we weren't sure what sort of format this meeting was going to take, whether it was a Zoom webinar or a meeting. So we have a couple of different options. One is going to be the Padlet. I suspect many of you have used a Padlet now at this point. So Brian can share in the chat a link to the Padlet, or if anybody does want to use the chat feature in the Zoom room, feel free to do that. And so we're just curious, what's your role? However you want to answer that question is just fine. And what's your institution? Again, these are tricky questions sometimes, so however you want to answer that is just fine. And then secondly, what do you want to get out of this session? And I'm just going to pause for a minute to let folks put that again into the Padlet or into the chat. All right, so definitely one thing I really like about the Padlets to be able to see all of the different responses. So we'll go and look at that in just a moment. So continue to fill that out. And then some of you have also even started working on number 3. So we have 5 questions total, but we were going to kind of space them out through this. So the next question is, what are some of the challenges that you think new graduate students face, new graduate students from underrepresented groups face as they're thinking about coming onto campus for the first time, both as either a doctoral student or as a master's student. So again, I'm going to pause again, and then Brian and I will continue. Then we'll talk more formally about the Summer Institute and how we got started with it and what are some of the things that we do in terms of programming. All right, so I'm just going to briefly summarize here. What do you all want to get out of the session? I see the word ideas mentioned many times. So ideas, new and different ways to try to do things. So at least we'll be able to share a few of the ways that we've been successful in doing some of these things. And then number 3, what are some of the challenges that new graduate students face? Students from underrepresented groups, not knowing what they don't know, a lack of community, culture representation amongst the faculty, ability to get a job on campus. They may be first generation students with full-time jobs, invisible curriculum, definitely caregiving responsibilities, coming from smaller institutions with fewer resources, hidden curriculum, writing for scholarly output, financial things, costs of graduate school. These are great. Of course, we know there's so many challenges for students. And so we can continue to add to these, and definitely these are exactly some of the things that we are aware that students are facing as well. Okay. So let's talk briefly about our program, and it sounds like some of you are at institutions that have similar programs. So this is called the Summer Research Institute. So it's a 7-week summer bridge program for underrepresented master's and doctoral students. It's coordinated by our, at the University of Minnesota, we have kind of a weird thing. There's this thing called the graduate school. And once upon a time, like 10 years ago, people would actually apply to the graduate school to get accepted to graduate school, but then it all got broken apart. So the colleges themselves are mostly in charge of graduate students, but there's still this unit called the graduate school that mostly does professional development and things like that. So that's who coordinates this particular effort. They do have a big focus on community building, navigating graduate school. Most of the students are connected with a faculty mentor that can support them in whatever their research areas are. And then the idea is that during this 7 weeks, they will create a research proposal and presentation. But there's a lot of flexibility around that because they want this. I think the way the graduate school usually talks about it, or the organizers think about it as a way to kind of, again, jumpstart their research. And then with the idea that they would take this proposal or this presentation and then continue on in the research that they're going to do in their graduate programs. So as that's being said, there's a lot of flexibility because the organizers want it to be as useful to them as possible. So I bet a lot of you have already moved on to our next question in the Padlet. What are some of the challenges for new graduate students from underrepresented groups for doing kind of quote unquote research? I always think that research is one of the most confusing words on campus because it can mean so many things, from the library research to doing primary original research. And then of course we have all the discipline, how it looks in all sorts of different disciplines. So I definitely always want to put that word in quotes. So let me go over to the Padlet here and let's look and see. And again, so continue to add, what do you think some of those challenges for new graduate students are when it comes to doing this quote unquote research? All right, so I'm just going to briefly pick a couple of these. So possibly a lack of mentors who may have similar backgrounds as they do. Organizing their research, so tarot exclamation point, definitely balancing research and teaching responsibilities and just all other responsibilities, definitely understanding the landscape on campus, imposter syndrome, pressure to disclose or not identities, knowing what the level of research is based on prior preparation. This is definitely a big one that we see in this, especially because we have both master's and doctoral students, and they're both beginning their programs. So there is quite a wide range of experiences before coming into this particular program. Okay, a lack of support for their actual research topics, for example, in terms of LGBTQ studies. Yeah, lots of good things here. Lack of training on methodologies. Some students might have a gap between when they were an undergraduate and now returning to graduate school, things like that. Okay, good. We will come and revisit these. So those are great answers. All right, so we have been part of this particular program for a while, and I was just trying to look back up in notes to try to see how it sort of evolved. So in 2018, it was a pretty small cohort, so there were 19 students, and we did basically they worked with the libraries in 2 different ways. There was just a general orientation session, and then there was a discipline-specific session about the literature review. So we had a group of science and engineering folks gather, and then we had social sciences and humanities. And this was just an in-person, again, I would suspect each of these was about an hour long, and they were very, again, like to me, a very one-shot kind of model. And that's what we did, and we didn't really know we should try to do anything different or better. So 2019, I would say, was very similar to 2018, except there were more students that were accepted in this cohort. We also had the same 2 workshop model, but the 2 workshops were sort of connected. In 2018, there were sort of separate things that happened, and now they were sort of connected. So we were able to at least have more like a 2-shot session. And then at the end, so exciting at that time, we had librarian trading cards, and we figured out who the trading card went with the people, and we handed them all to the people. And then we were like, oh, sign up for these consultations. These librarians are amazing. But unfortunately, few did, like barely any. So we took that and thought we can do better the next time. And then it was 2020, and then it was the pandemic. But luckily, summer 2020 felt different than March 2020. So we already had some good experience about how we could do things in different ways. So for this, there was a much bigger cohort because the whole Summer Institute was online. So they were able to have a larger cohort. So we did one workshop on Zoom that was a synchronous sort of Zoom session where we tried to get kind of that orientation of just that sort of basic knowledge. Then we were also very aware of, and the organizers were aware of, Zoom fatigue. So we wanted to try to be very strategic. So then we had some recorded videos that we recorded some videos and then made them available. And as I say here, they were sort of watched. Definitely not every person watched them, but hopefully the people that wanted to were able to do that. And if anybody's interested, they are linked here. And then the thing that we really were excited to try and worked really well is that we did figure out how to really facilitate librarian consultations. So with a summer research or a participant and a librarian, we worked really hard to make sure that they had a consultation on Zoom sometime in the program. So Brian's going to talk more about how we did it in 2021. And we just kind of, I think in 2020, it worked. It was a little bit clunky about how we went about it, but we figured out kind of how to do it a little bit better in 2021. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Great, thank you, Kate. Could you go to the next slide? Thanks. So in 2021, there were about 50 participants, so a lot larger. And these were students mainly entering programs in the sciences and social sciences. And as you see, like the previous year, the Summer Institute was completely online. So we actually had some students that were not physically on campus. Next slide. And so the graduate school sends out a form and this is trying, to get the students kind of thinking about their topic and what they want to do for their presentation and their annotated bibliography at the end of the institute. And so these are some of the things that they stated. One is first generation college students, primates and tap-in collection, correlation between religiosity and marriage stability amongst African-American couples. So very, a wide range of different topics. Next slide. So the libraries had 4 library sessions. We first had the introduction to the libraries for graduate students. And then we had something which I'll go into next called Choose Your Adventure. And then the one-on-one consultations like we did the previous year. And then we also did a workshop on the Pomodoro technique. So this introduction to the libraries was kind of a lecture, but with interactive components. It was an hour-and-a-half long, but we had a few breaks in there. And we went over search strategies, databases, citation managers, but we really asked them to, and we put them in breakout rooms to talk about some of their own experiences with research, either positive or negative. And that was really enlightening. And then we worked in and gave them some time to actually go in and use some of the databases and do research on their particular topic. Next slide, please. And we also pointed out this guide. So we have a library services and resources for graduate students guide. And so this is kind of like an entry point into the services and resources for all graduate students. And this was something new that we did that summer because we had a new website, and so this was developed in tandem with that. Next slide. So the Choose Your Own Adventure. So we had an hour for this, and we arranged with librarians, a number of whom are actually on this call, so they can fill in if I misrepresent what they did. But we had these 3 different sessions. They were 25-minute sessions, and so the students could pick 2, and they were done via Zoom again. And we also recorded them so that the session that they weren't able to attend, they could look at the recording of that. Next slide. So the one-on-one consultations, that's where a lot of the work that Kate and I did, and a lot of it was kind of at the back end. And the consultations were 30-minute online individual consultations with the student's respective subject liaison librarian. And the idea was that the consultations would occur within the week of the introduction to library services session, or the week thereafter. And the goal of the consultations were twofold. One was to help the students with their particular project, and then also to start, relationship building between the librarian and the student. And we gave the librarians some points and things that they could cover, but we really left it open. And things that were covered were, specific tools to the discipline, search strategies, even just talking about like going to graduate school. So it was kind of very open-ended. But these really turned out to be really valuable for both the student and the librarian. And how we arranged it is that weeks before, we asked the librarians to block out 6 hours of time, segments of totaling 6 hours within that 2-week period. And those were the times that we offered to the student to meet with the librarian. And and also in this form that we asked the students to pick out, we also asked them to upload a couple articles that they found on their topic, as well as a mind map of their topic and any questions that they had. Next slide. So these are some examples of topic mind maps, and they're a lot better organized than any mind map I have ever done for any of my research, believe me. Yeah, so really kind of detailed, but it really helped to have this, so the librarian could kind of see how the student was approaching that particular topic. Next slide. So then in the form, we had all the librarians listed with their particular subjects. and then asked the student to pick 2 or 3 times that they were available to meet with the librarian. And then Kate and I would go and kind of set up, or next slide, please. We would go from the back and set up the calendar invite with the Zoom link. And then we emailed the student and the librarian with what the student inputted into the form. And here's an example. Next slide. So the last library session that we had, it was in this session called Show Up and Write. And Kate did a session where she talked about the Pomodoro technique and then actually used it for doing research or reading or whatnot. And then after that session, there was a writing time or research time. And that was just kind of a Zoom like workroom where students were there and they were just supposed to work on whatever they wanted to. And then Kate and I were on call, and so students could ask questions, and then we would go into a breakout room and kind of talk about things or whatnot. Kate, there's a question in the chat about what is the Pomodoro technique, and you are much more, even though I have attended your workshop, which is wonderful, and I've used the Pomodoro technique, but I'll let you explain that.
All right, Brian. Yes. So we started teaching workshops around the Pomodoro technique in the pandemic when and our libraries were closed, and we were trying to figure out how can we support students during finals. And then they proved to be popular and also easy to teach and facilitate. So the Pomodoro technique is something anybody can Google. It is a very simple technique created in the late 80s, and it's around kind of task-based, brain-based research. It's very simple. Basically, setting a timer for 25 minutes, focusing on one task, removing all of your distractions, working on that one task for 25 minutes, setting a timer for a 5-minute break. That is called a Pomodoro, and then repeating that up to 4 times. So in our workshop, we literally talk for about 5 minutes, explaining what the Pomodoro is, and then we literally try it. I set a timer for 25 minutes. We are in a Zoom room together. It is very quiet, and we ask students or who's ever in the workshop to tell us what they're going to work on, and then afterwards we kind of just check in and how did it go, and then sometimes we can repeat it a couple times. Sometimes we just do one Pomodoro. So it's really easy. We'd already been doing it, so it's really easy to apply to this particular situation. So it worked really well.
Yeah, and if I can add, the Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato. So that's why, and you can look up, there's a Wikipedia article on why it is referencing a tomato. Next slide. So the Summer Institute, the graduate school staff sent an evaluation for all of the participants to fill out, where they would rate the sessions and talk about what they liked, the best thing that they liked, the least thing that they didn't like as well. Next slide. So, and they asked specifically about the library sessions. And so we got the top rating, which was best, most helpful, for 63.2%, and then 31.6%, it was the library sessions were considered somewhat helpful, second top rating. And then they were asked, which sessions did you find the most helpful? And there were 39 filled out questionnaires, and out of those, 10 of these comments focused on one or more of the library sessions. So like in this one, you can see that just being able to be introduced to citation software like Zotero was really helpful for this student. Examples of how to search was also really helpful. Next slide. Having the research librarians or subject librarians available and helping them to become more comfortable about asking questions and seeking clarity on things, that was really valuable for that person. And then some of the comments were just, really short and sweet. Librarian week, everything about that, or super useful. Next slide. And then we also asked feedback from the librarians who participated in the one-on-one consultations. And this is a comment from one of the librarians, and just how this really helped in them and establishing a relationship with new graduate students. And one thing that I really like in this comment is, which I find is so true, is that the students tend to be extremely self-reliant, and it's likely that if they didn't have this opportunity to meet with a librarian, they probably wouldn't have done it on their own. So just kind of helping them to show that they can come and ask for help. I think that's one of the most valuable things. And I should know, and I don't know if we mentioned this, but the one-on-one consultations was required for the Summer Institute participants to successfully complete it. So it wasn't like an optional thing. Next slide. And then some other comments were just some examples of things that this librarian talked about: scholarly identity, dissertations, using citation managers, other databases, and so forth. And also just talking about concerns about graduate school, and I think that's just being kind of this non-faculty person that someone can talk to about the discipline, about graduate school, just being available. Next slide.
Oh, Brian, before we get to that slide, I'm going to just share one other thing that
Sure.
in sort of hindsight, I feel like, to me, this ability for us to do these consultations was definitely like a silver lining of the pandemic, because before the pandemic, we would have tried to figure out how we could have gotten librarians into a physical space to meet one-on-one with people. And as you can imagine, that would not have worked. It didn't work well at all for all sorts of reasons, like summer scheduling, let alone, some of our librarians, like in psychology or things like sociology, were busier, or the sciences, based on how many participants there were. But after having gone through March, April, May, and June of the pandemic, when the libraries were closed and everybody was forced to move everything to Zoom, it was a moment to be like, oh, we know how to do this, and we've got this. And I think it really brought a lot of value to this program, because I think if that all had not happened, what Brian and I and the organizers would probably be literally thinking of would be like, how do we have a session for people that's going to be valuable? But of course it's not, because everybody really needs personalized advice, and there's no way to do that in a group session. And so we'd be like trying to figure out, well, maybe we'll have 3 or 4 sessions, and we'll put the science people over there and the social sciences. And again, just in hindsight, so glad we did not go down that path, and we're able to really go down this path to really provide value to the participants in a way that, again, it just wouldn't have been imaginable in 2019. And now it seems like, how could we have not thought about that in 2019? But I can just say, as being there, we thought about the world in a physical way, and now we were just able to totally break that. So that's one of my takeaways, I suppose. I'm going to turn back over to you, Brian.
Yeah. Next slide. So the last question for the Padlet is, what are you doing at your libraries to support new graduate students? It looks like a lot of people already have commented. So just looking at that, participating at orientations, visiting their first quarter intro classes. Some people do one-shot orientations. I'm sure we're all familiar with those. Currently offering workshops on a variety of topics each semester. There is one library does a grad orientations, workshops through the Writing Center and graduate program. And then interesting, one person wrote that they have a bridge program for undergrads planning to head to graduate school. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, lots of different ways of approaching this. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're planning for this year. Planning is well underway. So this year, the graduate school decided that the Summer Institute is going to be in person. And because of that, they have fewer students in the Institute. So there's going to be 28 students, but their research interests in the departments that they're entering is a lot more diverse. So there's a lot. I'm very excited as being a humanities person that there are humanities graduate students who are going to be part of it. In fact, I even have a graduate student who's gonna be part of the institute that's going into the German department, which I'm the liaison for. So most of our sessions are gonna be in person, but we are still continuing to have the one-on-one consultations via Zoom. That's gonna be the default, but we'll give the option if a student wants to do an in-person session and a librarian is okay with that, then definitely they can do that. But I think, thinking about this too is just because not all of our librarians have their own offices. And so just the logistics of that and setting up a time, it would just be a lot harder to do. So one other change is that we're changing the Choose Your Adventure sessions a little bit. We're still going to be doing the how to read research articles and the lit review, as well as the session on browsing. But we're also going to be having a session on conducting research through an anti-racism lens. Yeah, I think that is all we have, right, Kate? So there is a question in the chat. Do you offer grad students a chat service? If so, have you developed best practices so the student gets the most out in the experience? So we have a chat service, but it's just the general chat service. It's available 24/7. Like each librarian can set up, can do chat. Well, it actually would be Zoom mainly. But we don't have one specifically for graduate students. I don't know if that answers the question completely. Does anyone else have questions or comments?
Yeah, feel free to use the raise hand feature now, or if you want to put your questions into the chat. We're just happy to have any questions that you have. A lot of people mentioned that they offered workshops. I don't know if people feel comfortable in the chat to either share just like what's their most popular workshop or what's something that they're working on or anything like that. Feel free to share that way too.
So there's another question from Elvis in the group, in the chat. I'm curious if any of the librarians in the initiative identify as being from underrepresented groups themselves.
Yes, we have 2 librarians who are of color and identify that way. There are other librarians who identify as LGBTQ+. I'm one of them, but so yeah, from that standpoint, yes.
A question from Bonnie. Do you keep track of whether the students who participate in this institute are more likely to seek out librarian consultation in the future?
Anecdotally, we do. We don't really collect statistics like as far as going, okay, was this person someone from the Summer Institute or not? But like I myself, so I'm the librarian for linguistics, and there was a student that I met with during the institute, and I've had 3 other interactions with that student afterwards. And I don't know if there are other U of M librarians that want to comment on that question.
Hi, yeah, I can comment. Hi, my name is Kat Nelson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a interim social sciences librarian at the University of Minnesota. I work primarily with students in sociology, anthropology, American Indian Studies, American Studies, and Asian American Studies. And I love the consultations because I definitely get those students coming back to me either within the year or the following year when they've really started digging into some of their research projects and made really wonderful connections with them. And I find that those initial meetings really help to sort of set the groundwork for building a relationship with them throughout their studies.
I would say, going on also what Kat said, that we try to impress upon the students in the times when we're meeting with them in the summer workshops is that there are lots of librarians and library staff and experts and all across campus, but that early and often is always what we recommend in terms of having consultations with obviously the library or the Center for Writing or other folks on campus and things like that. And I think that having seen this program when we just told the participants, like, you should go meet with your librarian, and of course they didn't, because it's really intimidating. It was hard, and we all know all the reasons why that doesn't happen, even though we know it's going to be so impactful. So I think that being able to work with this program and then being able on the back end to figure out, especially with Zoom, that connecting people can be done, librarians and participants, and that some participants, I think, do also meet with multiple librarians because they're working on lots of interdisciplinary topics and things like that. But it really sets the stage, and I think the expectation that there are experts, especially outside of their departments, right? I mean, we're connected with their departments, but we're not in those sort of channels that are available. And I do hope that it sets a really good precedent for them to make connections all across campus as well. And that we're sort of like that gateway to other resources that are going to be helpful.
Yeah, and going back to the question about underrepresented, like within the librarians and the people who are running the program, so forth. So one thing that the Summer Institute does is they have mentors. So they have past participants who are primarily from underrepresented groups who kind of are, and they actually assisted, we forgot to mention that they actually assisted in a number of our workshops, and we're just kind of there as kind of a second or third person to facilitate questions and so forth. So that was another way that to kind of involve them. And actually I got a lot of good follow-up from some of those students about, because I taught the session on browsing, and they just thought, "Ah, it's the best thing since sliced bread," and and stuff like that. So they were just over the hill about that.
Well, I have a question about the mind maps. Can you tell us a little bit more about the graduate students' reactions to that? Was that something that they had done in previous classes in their undergraduate years, or was this a kind of fresh approach for them?
Do you want me to take
Yeah, you take
that,
that,
Brian?
Kate.
Okay. Yes, I am a big believer of mind maps for basically all of my audiences. If they need to, if we want them to do some hands-on research, then I always try to be sure that we have time to do even a brief mind map. I think that in the session, again, with the graduate students for the Summer Institute, the mind map is very helpful to, I think, get them over any initial worry of, I don't know what my topic is, or I'm not sure what I'm putting on this mind map. And in, again, that sort of face-to-face world, we have whiteboards and things like that. And then I always like to have people talk about their mind maps with each other. But our mind maps are very free-formed, and I always emphasize just anything you make a mind map is just fine, because it's only for you. You should write down things you know about your topic, questions you have, connections, topics, subtopics, but otherwise very loose in terms of how the mind map gets created. And I think the couple of examples that we saw were really great, because some people made it more about like the research process versus others put it more in a topic frame. And I think, again, those are both great things to do. But then to me, the mind map is just a perfect way to, again, then if we're asking students to try some hands-on searching, they have the keywords right there in their mind map, and they can use those versus that horrible moment where they're staring at a blank search box and they don't know, they just can't. Their brains freeze, like my brain freezes when I'm teaching sometimes or whatever. I'm like, I don't know what to put in the search box. So that's, I think, of the role of the mind map. And I think that the leaders of the participants also really find value in the mind map, because I think that they, again, use them with their mentors and use them. Again, I think then the students also do talk with each other about their topics and use the mind map in multiple ways too.
There was an additional question from Elvis. Elvis was asking, this was perhaps covered, but was there a focus on archival research or special collections too? I assume was another part of that.
It was covered. I mean, it was covered. It was mentioned in the introduction, but none of the topics that, because they were doing primarily science or social science topics, they didn't kind of really lend themselves to bringing up bringing archival resources. And also because it was all, we were still going through the pandemic, and I don't even remember if our Anderson library was even open. So, but we mentioned that they could definitely, we went over what collections we have, and that they could reach out to the curators and so forth. But yeah, that's something that we could definitely think about, especially since if we're having more people who are focused on humanities, that might be, something to consider.
Are there any additional questions and comments for Brian and Kate? Well, I think that this was a great session. Thank you both for introducing this interesting topic and some great ideas for supporting graduate researchers. We have a couple more minutes. If anyone else can think of questions as we're wrapping up, please feel free. But otherwise, I'd like to thank our leaders again, and also to thank you all for attending today, this session.
Well, I want to thank ULS for organizing this, and this is a great opportunity to talk about this and sharing it with others and getting some ideas as well. I really appreciate that.